You're listening to There Ought to Be a Law, the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by me, Anthony Cimino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has worked to make cars safer. Hey listeners, welcome to 2026. Holy cow.
Man, that was fast. Wow.
I know. It's today is Tuesday, January 6th, and we're all basking in the glow of the Consumer Electronics Show. Is that what it's still called?
Maybe? I think so.
Yeah, basically it's this trade show full of nonsense where the future is now and it never comes. And auto companies get sucked up in it as well. But first, let's talk about, we'll get to some of that, but first let's talk about an auto company that's just always living in the future. That's right. I'm sorry. I hate to start off a new year. You know, you want to be optimistic and hopeful, but Tesla still exists. So Tesla it is. The BBC has this great article titled, "Is Texting Behind the Wheel of a Self-Driving Tesla Crazy?" They managed to write an entire article on this because the answer is just yes. Yes, it is. The writer of the the article basically says, I tried it. It was wonderful. I want it for my 85-year-old father and it'll make his life better, but I'm not fully confident in some of this stuff. So is this very kind of the worst part of liberals type response? Wow, I'm really...
Yeah, you're tripping.
I was 2026 starting off. Yeah.
10,000 13-year-olds in Los Angeles can't be all wrong.
I know. But so I'm going to quote down to my favorite part of the article as a quote. Basically, let me back up. So Elon Musk is saying, yeah, you can go ahead and text and drive. Essentially, it's solved. It's safe. Essentially, he always likes to do that little caveat. But then replying to that is a great quote. Tesla doesn't always seem to have full grasp of what the consequences of its technology changes would be. And I think this is kind of a very big example of that, says Michael Brooks, Executive Director of the Center for Auto Safety. Oh, essentially what Tesla is saying here is they're going to allow their drivers to break the law. I agree. Michael Brooks. Any relation to Michael Brooks?
There are a lot of Michael Brooks out there. Football players, basketball players.
But how many of them?
This one was right on point, though. And this is, look, we talk about this ad nauseum with Tesla and the features that they're adding. And, there's a long list of them now that are problematic, from, autopilot through their summon mode, through their door handles that don't allow effective escape from the vehicle, to any other number of things that we could point out here. But this is this one is particularly bad. I mean, first of all, I'm just going to have to point out the title of the article, is texting behind the wheel of a self-driving Tesla crazy? Well, nobody knows because there are no self-driving Teslas at this point. But moving forward from that minor point that I have to make about the article, essentially, we are in a world where none of this technology is regulated appropriately for safety. And for a long time now, and we'll talk later in the episode about how this wall is starting to break down, but for a long time now, Tesla has been one of the few automakers who's willing to take the type of, frankly, legal risks and put this technology on the road, knowing that humans aren't going to be able to safely operate autopilot. And now on top of that, they're claiming, oh, well, the system's now good enough to allow you to text and drive, which is completely not true. I mean, if you have to remain attentive to your vehicle's operation at all times when you're behind the wheel, then, taking your eyes or your mind off of the act of driving and putting it into, texting your, I don't know, your Anthony, you'd be texting your trainer about, your weightlifting routine that you're going to you just can't do that. I mean, it's completely incongruous with the act of driving. It doesn't work. Tesla has clearly not put forth enough independently verified data, none. But even their own data, which is aspirational, still doesn't, bear out that drivers should be taking their attention away from the driving task to operate phones, or to, even if you have texts that don't rely on pushing physical buttons on the keyboard, the cognitive disparity that's going to create when you're thinking of what to say or interacting cognitively with the texting, whatever texting machine you're using, is going to cause problems and direct your attention away from supervising the vehicle as it makes decisions that you should be making about your driving pattern, essentially. So this is a huge problem. And the reason we're here is, both because Tesla has been putting technology into its vehicles and selling it and promoting it in a way that doesn't give drivers the full story, doesn't allow them to protect themselves from the system's inherent flaws, but also because legislatures and regulators simply are not able to pass laws and regulations that can help, ensure that safety is built into these types of systems, and that these systems are having to comply with safety regulations before they can be set loose on the road. So there's a multitude of failures going on here at the same time.
So, Michael, let's assume that my lifestyle changes. I get hit on the head. I join the Proud Boys, go out, buy a Tesla, find an extra $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 for their full self-driving. And I'm in my Tesla going off to, my hate rally. And I'm texting while doing it. And I'm like, hey, guys, who are we going to hate today? And I get into a crash. Now, Elon told me I can text and drive. Can I hold Elon liable for my crash?
I highly doubt it. I mean, you're already going to be facing, just under your own state's laws, depending on what state you're in. Lots of states have different laws around texting and driving, but you're going to be committing a criminal infraction that is going to be charged to you, not to the vehicle. That's going to be persuasive to any jury looking into it, whether it's a civil or a criminal matter, that you were responsible and that you were violating the law at the time of the crash. I mean, that's essentially how Tesla has operated, and it escaped liability or escaped blame in a lot of these situations. Something we've talked a lot about on the show before, the moral crumple zone. You're essentially shifting all blame onto the human wherever you can, even though the only reason that human was put in that position in the first place is because this technology has been allowed to operate unsafely on the roads.
Okay, but what if I buy a different car? Because now I believe it's CES, Mercedes has announced their oh, wow. I don't know if that audible groan of Michael just came across, but Mercedes has come out with their own S-Class Drive Assist Pro, which is, they're playing this game. We've talked in the past about these SAE levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Mercedes is kind of like, well, it's not level 3, because level 3 allows you to take your hands off the wheel, not pay attention. This is level 2 plus.
Whatever the hell that means, and it's functionally meaningless. Honestly, it's really just the reason manufacturers are calling it is because the SAE's system of levels of autonomy simply doesn't capture what's going on in the industry. It's both outdated, and it was never. I mean, my personal opinion, was never really a great way of classifying vehicles from the start.
But some lawmakers have put the SAE levels into law, or they've just proposed
in
that.
some circumstances, they reference them in either legislation. There haven't been any formal adoption of that, and it's not a vehicle safety standard so much as it's simply a classification guide, right? It's not. California has used it, right? California, that's the whole reason that Tesla and now Mercedes are able to evade being directly regulated by the California DMV is because they are classifying these vehicles. The manufacturer, right, has the choice here to classify these vehicles as a level 2, which is interesting because you would think that, I always struggle with the SAE levels when you get to the level 2, 3 area, right? Because in both circumstances, there is a time at which drivers, need to take over the vehicle because it might be operating unsafely. It's both of them are conditional automations in some respect, and yet, level 3 is regulated and level 2 is not, and so it becomes really easy, I think, for manufacturers to say, "Oh, we're just a level 2." And to get away with putting this technology on the road. I mean, look, if I was going to choose an automaker to mimic Tesla in this area, it might be Mercedes-Benz. I mean, as the article notes in the byline, they say that, this is like Tesla Autopilot, the Mercedes system, but made by a company with a culture of safety. And that's not something I can completely disagree with. I think we've mentioned a number of times going through recalls and other things on the podcast, how proactive Mercedes-Benz is on some certain safety problems related to other manufacturers. So while that is true, I would also suggest that Mercedes dipping its toe into this area kind of shows that culture of safety may not be as strong as we thought, because while Mercedes has promised, with their level 3 vehicles that are, operating at low speeds and traffic jams in very specific circumstances, and I think in Nevada and maybe California now, they're not, they're clearly putting another vehicle on the road or another system on the road in this driver assistance system, where they're promising almost all the same things as Tesla is promising, at least in their aspirational CES announcements. They're basically saying, you've just got to keep a little watch over this thing and everything's going to be fine. They don't really go into the fact that with the level 3 systems, they said they would accept some of the liability coming on. They didn't say necessarily criminal or some of the tort liability that comes along with that. But it would be great if a manufacturer came out and said, we're going to put this on the road, but anytime our driver assist system is operating and it gets in a crash, we're going to take legal responsibility. We're not going to shift that off onto the driver. We're not going to allow for this moral crumple zone to prevent us from being held accountable for our mistakes. Mercedes is choosing the Tesla route here, which is, the route that sees human beings blamed for their failure and their predictable failure to properly monitor these systems. So I'm a little confused by this announcement from Mercedes. I am a little, disappointed in the company for kind of going down this rabbit hole, but I think that they're just the first manufacturer in, dozens that are about to jump the safety ship and follow Tesla down this, what is ultimately not development of new safety features, but development of convenience features that don't really have anything to do with safety and perhaps in the end will only degrade it.
Hey, I want to remind everybody, all of our listeners and our esteemed colleagues here, that at the heart of J3016 standard is what? What word, Anthony?
The.
It rhymes with bullship.
Bullship. No, that's not in a J3016. Come on.
Well, I gave you the clue because I call it J3016 standard. It's not a standard.
Yep.
It's just a note, and defines a nomenclature. It has never been assessed for its safety characteristics or safety defects, and there is no standard definition by any governmental authority of what level 2, 3, 4, 5, anything else is. So a manufacturer can call their operational capability whatever they want. And anybody who relies on that is really putting themselves in a world of jeopardy. So that's part of the reason why we established the checklist for regulators that's freely available on our website. We'll talk more about that later, but really everybody should know that references to J3016 are references to no standard whatever. There is not a single requirement in that document that says you shall do something or you shall evaluate in the following manner. You're free to do whatever you want and refer to J3016 in any way you want without fear of contradicting it.
Yeah. And there's just not enough distinction in J3016, I don't believe, to allow for you to discriminate between what's a level 2, what's a level 3 vehicle, where does the regulation or safety regulation of autonomy begin in there? States like California have chosen to begin at level 3, which I think is a mistake. I mean, I think at a minimum, you should be looking at level 2. In fact, there are automations that function at what would be a level 1 on the SAE scale that I still think should be regulated in some way as though they're autonomous. They should be subject to restrictions on their operating design domain, because even at level 1, there are some sensors and things that have their limitations.
So the safety consequences of levels 2 and 3 are exactly the same. In both cases, you have a vehicle operating under automatic control that will abruptly transition to human control with the expectation that the human will safely take over all of those driving functions. There's very little evidence that can in fact happen. Usually takes 10 seconds or so. Bill Koopman has talked about a different way of classifying the vehicles. And in fact, in our documents recently, we referred to computer-driven vehicles rather than levels 1 through X. I think that's a much better way of talking about them because they all have similar safety characteristics that they all require human intervention with no warning at any particular time when there's an unanticipated hazard.
Yeah, and I'll also point out that if you want a probably a more concise description of this Mercedes issue, please check out Phil's Substack post from this morning, where he goes through this problem as well.
So the takeaway is no matter what the marketing materials say, if you're in the driver's seat, you're always in charge, right?
You always should be.
Yeah, I think you always should be.
Okay, yeah. So what I suggest to people is you do what that Tesla driver did a few years back, and you sit in the passenger seat, and then you let the car drive itself. So you give up all responsibility.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
Well, you're less fun than I'd hoped.
It's well, I mean, technically, where you're sitting in the car, if you start the car up and you're allowing it to operate, you are the operator, whether you're in the trunk or not.
Ooh, from the trunk. Hey, listeners, before we continue, we're not going to tell you to go to donate because it's the start of a new year. I just want to thank everybody who donated last year. I think it was a record year. I don't know. I didn't run the numbers. But we appreciate everybody who's donated. Thank you so much. Let's go into a positive story from CES. Should we do that? So Michael sent around this story, and I thought the way he wrote it was he was being very cynical. And it was this great story about this battery startup company that's doing solid state batteries. And so solid state batteries are, they're lighter, they're more energy dense, they're less prone to fire. You can charge them quicker. They're, as Fred Perkins would say, everything in the future will be better. And I've always been like, solid state sounds amazing. And Fred kind of looks at me a little cynically. Let's not deny it. Don't deny it. And so this article talks about this startup called Donut. I should have just known right off the bat. So Donut says they have a solid state battery. It's already on the market in some company called, I believe, Burge is their electric motorcycle company. And this sounds great. And I'm reading this whole thing and I'm like, this is awesome. The future is now. Until I got to this one part of the article, and this is from InsideEVs.com. I'm going to quote, "The new model, which is powered by Donut's solid-state battery, is also capable of 217 miles in standard guise, but a larger battery option, which fits the same cradle, can increase the range to 370 miles, but the charging time has been dramatically reduced to less than 10 minutes with Verge," this is the motorcycle company, saying that it has deliberately designed the new bike to take longer to charge so that riders can enjoy a coffee while waiting. And this is why it's my gaslight, because that is horseshit. There is no. Hey guys, the biggest complaint people have with electric vehicles, it takes too long to charge. This one charges so quick that before you even plug in, it's charged. It's magic. We want people. We're really known for our coffee. Like really, when that's the reason you're out riding your electric motorcycle. People, they're like, yeah, I gotta tap on my battery, but damn, that coffee they have there is so good. This is a gaslight. This is horseshit. There's no.
You consider a couple things here, though. The Verge company is making motorcycles, right? So it's not as though you can stop and get a cup of coffee and hop back in your car and drive and drink the coffee, right? You can't drink a cup of coffee, at least I don't think you can. Maybe I'm sure someone has done it, but can you drink a cup of coffee riding a motorcycle? I mean, it sounds like your coffee is going to get cold real fast. So, but, I don't know. I didn't find that quote quite as bad as you, right?
You're gaslighting me now. This is hard because
this is this is something that since we started talking about electric vehicles and battery issues many years ago, this is a battery that's a lot lighter, for whatever amount of energy density it has. It's much lighter than lithium ion, any of the battery formulations that we've seen commercialized in the United States. It doesn't have, the battery dendrite problems, the squish cells, the thermal runaway potential that the batteries that we're putting in EVs across America have now. They're not using rare metals. They say that they're only using geopolitically safe materials. So this avoids the heavy vehicle problem that we've noted incessantly that's produced when you add massive batteries to vehicles that are in many cases already too large. Doesn't have the fire issues that we've seen in the EVs on the road today, and it doesn't have a lot of the social and geopolitical consequences that might lead to us taking over another country next week. So
I'm all for all of that.
Is this really a bad thing, right?
No. See, I'm all for everything you just said. I'm with you 100%. But them saying we slowed down the charging so you can enjoy a cup of coffee. This is where I call bullshit, because you're right. Most people are not going to grab a cup of coffee, get back on their motorcycle and try to drink it. Instead, you and your gang of vegan leather wearing EV bike riders, you go out in a convoy. There's only 4 charging stations, but there's 12 of you. I got to wait for Barry to drink his coffee before I can plug in. No.
I've seen a lot of biker movies in my time, and I got to tell you, in every one, they all sit down and have a nice cup of coffee before they go off and do anything.
Yeah, but are they still plugged into the gas pump?
That's why they spend so much time in Canada, because of Tim Hortons. It's everywhere.
But they're not sitting there drinking their coffee while they're still occupying a gas pump. No, you go in, you tap up your fuel. Hey, you can come off to the side. Then we sit down on a picnic blanket. We can look and go, okay, where are the Proud Boys? Let's avoid them.
Right, yeah. They're very deliberate in their actions typically.
Yeah, if anything, they slowed down the charging of this because they're like, we're putting a lot of power into this small little box in a really short period of time. Let's be safe. And if that's what it is, I am all for that. I'm all for them erring towards a safe charging environment. That's fine. But this is horseshit.
Donut says they've achieved the Holy Grail. They found the Holy Grail, right? Everything is perfect. In the future, everybody's going to do it. And it's great fodder for an announcement. I think the future is going to be a little bit less glittery than the Holy Grail appears right now. But let me tell you what's going to happen. If in fact it's true, if they have found the Holy Grail, Tesla's going to get a couple, going to take them apart, and they're going to turn their gigafactory inside out to produce them. And our friends at Donut are going to wave their hands and say, but we have patents and intellectual property. And Tesla's going to say, guess what? We're big, you're small, and catch us if you can.
All right. Well.
But I mean, it's a wonderful thing. I hope it's true. But time will tell. I wouldn't buy stock in it just yet.
Yes. Again, my gaslight is not focused on their technology at all. It is posted on specifically
all about the cup of coffee,
that line
right?
saying we slowed down charging for coffee. No, All right.
Yeah, I don't know if that was tongue in cheek or what. It's hard to
it
tell.
doesn't come across that way. So,
I mean, the company's name is Donut Labs. You got to expect a little yuck.
I mean,
yuck going on. Who knows?
I love it. Michael, what's your gaslight?
My gaslight, and you know what? I'm not even sure if this is a gaslight. It could be a gaslight in a sense from GM, but there was a story in the Detroit Free Press yesterday, the title of which is GM NHTSA want people to wear seatbelts. A Detroit family does too. You know, it's an article that goes through a family's really bad experience with a crash. And you know, it goes into how NHTSA and Ford are addressing the seatbelt wearing issue, but it neglects a really important point. You know, GM looks kind of like a puff piece for GM. I don't think it was intended that way. But one thing that's noted in the article is that GM's releasing seatbelt reminders into their vehicles. Now, these are, you know, basically this was a law that was passed in 2012 that required a rear seatbelt reminder in American cars, required a rule doing that by the mid 2010s. I think it was October 2015 may have been the final date for that. In fact, that rule did not come out until the very end of the Biden administration. I think it was either the December or January of this past year. We're still not sure. I think that rule is still being held up in the OMB, the Office of Management Budget, in their OIRA, Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs Division. So we're still not sure that it's going to be required even by 2028. So, you know, we're looking at a 16 plus year period from the time the law was passed until the time these are actually going to see this technology go into cars, which has always been really troubling for me because, you know, moving a seatbelt buzzer to the rear seats where it's already been in the front seats since for God knows how long, the 80s, I think is when that happened, doesn't seem to be all that big of a technical or regulatory lift. And if auto companies are, able to delay simple safety standards like that 20 years, then what does that say about some of the more complex standards that we're always talking about here, such as, standards around crash prevention tech and even more so standards around autonomy? So what they ignore in this article is that GM behind the scenes has been one of the major forces, them and the Automotive Alliance, which they're a member of, in pushing alternatives to effective seatbelt reminders. What they're pushing for is a system that basically watches your doors, and it's simple, cheap software that will, if you open your back door and then you shut your back door and there's not a buckling taking place in the back, then you're going to get the chime. They're also pushing that technology to address hot car deaths. It's not going to be completely effective in doing that. Just because you open up a rear door doesn't mean there's a child or an occupant going into the car. Using that to inform the vehicle that an occupant might be left in the car unbuckled is obviously not going to always be the correct guess. And that's what it ultimately is just a guess based on the door being opened or closed. GM has been pushing that as an alternative both to the rear seatbelt reminder, which, ultimately is going to require the ability for the car to sense an occupant in that seat. The driver's seat's easy, because when there's an occupant in the driver's seat based on the vehicle being turned on with a key and all that sorts of thing, that gives you the absolute unquestionable presence of a human in the driver's seat. It gets more difficult when you move into other seats when you have to confirm that there's an actual human there. There is radar technology and other technologies that are available and whose price is going down every day that could detect humans in the car and be deployed to ensure both that seatbelt reminders are working and that you're detecting occupants in the vehicle when they're not supposed to be there, particularly children in hot cars. this article doesn't get into any of that, or GM and the industry's resistance to just getting this very simple tech into vehicles. And for that reason, it's going to get my Gaslight of the Week.
Okay. Before we move on, because this article, I wish we could link to it, but it's paywalled. It talks about a family of four. They're all buckled in and they hit a patch of black ice and it caused their car to crash into a barrier. Now, what they did is the woman who driving the car said, I didn't feel safe staying in the car while waiting for emergency service to come to them and seeing all these lights come with them. So they got out of the car and started walking down the street, which unfortunately they were then hit by another vehicle that I assume hit the same black ice or for whatever reason. So what the question I have for you, Michael, is did they make the right choice by exiting that vehicle in this situation where there is that icy condition? Are you better off staying inside the crash disabled vehicle or getting out?
God, I mean, that's completely dependent on circumstances, I would say, because, you know, if you're on a rural road and you hit a patch of black ice and you know that there are more cars coming towards you on that road, you know, it depends on, you know, do you have a place to escape? Are you surrounded on both sides by, I'm sure we've all driven on roads where there's literally not really a spot you can go to get away from the road, in which case you certainly might be safer in your car, buckled up and with your car on so that you might still have airbag protection and that sort of thing. Also, if you've looked at, on interstates, I've seen a number of videos of heavy trucks that are hitting black ice or just icy patches, whether it's, black ice or not, and causing massive pileups that result in fire and injuries and deaths to lots of people who remained in their cars, plus people who had gotten out of the vehicle. So I would say it's incredibly situationally dependent.
Okay.
Whether or not you want to exit your vehicle after a crash. There are lots of bad things that can happen after a crash. You can, if it's nighttime, you can lose all of your lights, at which point you're sitting, in a vehicle that can't be seen by approaching vehicles and is certainly a hazard. I mean, for me, if there is an available exit to get as far away from the road as possible, I think that is most likely your best choice in these circumstances. Just completely remove yourself from the possibility that a following vehicle is going to be able to strike you or hit ice and lose control and maybe run off the road, 30 yards and strike you. I mean, I'm talking get completely out of the situation while you wait for emergency responders.
This is just, as a reminder, this is just one of the millions of events that happen each year, which would be called an edge case. And because it's called an edge case, it would be completely dismissed by the AV manufacturers as something that's unreasonable to design for. So, there's millions of those things happening every year. And every time I hear about this, I try to put a Waymo into that situation and say, what would Waymo do? And the answer is, who the hell knows? They never designed for it. So my turn for Gaslight,
yeah,
right?
It's your turn. He's all excited.
Yeah, because my Gaslight is titled Gaslight Waiting for Fred, which I think was... So I was able to figure that out so far, but the other title, the subtitle, is Self-Driving Cars Can Prevent Over 1 Million Road Injuries Across the U.S. by 2035. And by Sanjukta Mondal. And I'm not even going to go into this because it's so stupid. It's amazing that it got published. But what's interesting about it to me is that it's the third generation bullshit, third generation gaslight, because this is based upon a study that Waymo did that just made up numbers. And they called it a peer-reviewed study. Of course, the peers were all either employees or clients of Waymo. So that's not exactly typical of peer reviews to establish the credibility of a document. But anyway, New York Times picked this up and said, well, it's peer-reviewed, so it's good. And apparently now, what's his name again? Sanjukta, his or her, Sanjukta Mondal has picked up the New York Times article and transcribed it into this article that is appearing today in Tech Explorer. So it's very interesting how this urban myth is now being propagated. It's the same technique that right-wing journalists, so-called, you can see my air quotes if you look closely, pass bad information back and forth to each other. When they do that, they build up the Google references and get a higher priority for the reference. So, it rapidly becomes a fact as far as Google is concerned. And this is trending in the same way. It's published on MSN, and it's just nonsense that's being elevated to the position of being de facto true because they say it is. And journalists have gotten very lazy, I think. They don't go back to the source. Maybe they never did. I don't know. I'm too young to have that history, Michael. What do you think? But
it's tough.
Deplorable.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough because, none of the journalists are operating with all the full deck either, right? They're getting fed piecemeal what Waymo and what other automated vehicle companies want them to believe based on data that hasn't been independently reviewed and isn't available for a full review by the public. So,
well, isn't there some document that's out there now that tries to distill this into technical questions that they can use to challenge some of these positions?
I don't know. Is there?
Oh my God, guys. Look, if you're a journalist out there and you're like, look, I've been fed too sticky sweet a story from Waymo's PR, and I'm sure you're getting a foot rub from them at the same time. Stop for a second, think, all right, I need a little grit in my gravy. Then contact the Center for Auto Safety. You can just go to autosafety.org, find contact information. Just go contact at autosafety.org, and I guarantee one of these two gentlemen, Fred or Michael, will respond to you and say, bullshit. Not your question, but Waymo.
Well, not only that, but we'll provide you with a document that provides you with a basis of critical questions that you might want to ask them.
And then your story becomes a lot richer and deeper. And then you're slowly moving up the ladder. And now you're not just a PR cub reporter.
Your Pulitzer Prize is hanging out there, buddy.
Well, I'm sorry. That's why it's drafty in here. Let's okay, so I'm looking at our internal show notes here, and on Gaslight section it says Anthony destined to win regardless of topic chosen. So do we even have to do scoring? I mean, personally, I honestly think Fred won there. I mean, his was right to the point and good. But second place, honestly, was Michael, not for your gaslight, because it was a little wishy-washy, but was for trying to gaslight me during my own gaslight. See, this is...
I'm just happy you didn't make yourself the winner for once. So we're working out well.
That's progress, Anthony. That's
Fred's
progress.
We're
glad to see the progress.
My therapist said I should, be more magnanimous. And I said, that word sounds too expensive for this conversation. Let's get into something. Let's get an update into something positive and great. Congestion pricing. That's right, people. We've all heard the political talk about that socialist little island. Well, it's not really an island. New York City putting in congestion pricing. How dare they? It's going to destroy everything. The state of New Jersey wanted to sue the city of New York for charging $9 to head in below 60th Street. Anyway, this has been going on for a year now, and the New York Times has a great little overview of this, and I'll just walk through the highlights real quick. So less traffic, faster moving traffic that's there, less noise complaints, less serious injuries. No restaurants are complaining. They're saying, hey, we have more customers now. They were all worried saying, oh, there'll be less cars. So overall, congestion pricing, big win. Big win.
Yeah. Is there any negative here? I mean, just stretching to look for safety issues here. I was noting that the increase in the average speed being great could have an impact on safety. Higher speeds, more injuries or more severe injuries. But when you look at the average vehicle speed in the congestion zone, it's 8.5 miles per hour. So I don't know how applicable that is. And they looked at areas outside of the congestion zone and inside the congestion zone. And I think it was there was an 8.6% decrease in injuries related to cars inside the congestion zone and only a 1.6% decrease outside. So far it looks great.
Yeah. And keep in mind the speed limit inside New York City is 25 miles per hour. So I mean, traffic's not quite hitting a steady 25 miles per hour. So from a safety point of view, I'm feeling pretty good about that. The only negatives they found were a couple of random people out in Queens saying, well, I'm not going to go into Manhattan anymore for my doctors. Welcome to Queens. It's the largest borough full of doctors. You don't actually have to travel that far to find a good doctor. But hey,
any shoulder injuries from people reaching for their wallet too fast? Have they solved that problem?
Yeah, it's people getting carpal tunnel for getting on their internet and complaining.
All right, there's a side effect.
Let's see what next do I want to jump into before we? There's one here. This convoy. Yeah, let's do this. This is an interesting one from an article from an Electrek titled "Convoy: Electric Semi-Brand SANY (SANY) pairs with autonomy with human experience." So this sounds like the start of a Stephen King movie, where it's a convoy of 18-wheelers essentially. So you've got 4 or 5 of them, and the lead vehicle is operated by a human, and the following vehicles are computer driven, following that person, saying, hey, this is safer now because the lead vehicle is kind of in charge and the other ones are just following behind it. And clearly this is a company that's not experienced traffic on planet Earth, because I've seen convoys like this all driven by humans, and then I've watched human drivers jump in between the 18-wheelers. Yeah. What happens then? I've watched it and depending on how close these things are traveling, I've watched cars jump in front of 18-wheelers at a very unsafe distance. And is it just jackknife bonanza? What happens here? This is something that it sounds like a good idea on paper until you spend a thought on it. And then you're like, oh, this is not good.
Well, if you think of it, what they've really done is they've reinvented the idea of a train, except it's a very expensive train, because instead of having inexpensive railroad cars, they've got these very fancy 18-wheelers or 20-wheelers or 26-wheelers, who the hell knows what they're going to be, cascading down the road. And one of the advantages for the truckers, of course, is they don't have to pay for the road. It comes out of taxes, and you and I are paying for it as well as they are. Whereas the railroads have to pay for their own track. So really an unfair competition, but that doesn't stop the trucking companies from wanting to skew the competition in their favor. I think this is a really bad idea. Hopefully not a bad idea whose time has come, but there's just so many questions to be answered that aren't being answered by the current AV trucks that are out there trying to generate a few miles.
Any thoughts, Michael? He agrees.
Yeah, I think this has got a long way to go in looking at, first of all, how are humans going to interact with these convoys? And also, is this just, every time I see this idea, I feel like it's just a very easy way to remove, if you've got a convoy of 4 semis and there's only one driver in the front, well, you've removed 3 drivers from your payroll. And at the same time, the following vehicles are not autonomous vehicles. They are functionally just programmed to follow the head vehicle. I don't know if these, maybe system could work on, very non-crowded, long-distance stretches on interstates. But, I don't see a world in which this is going to work, delivering, goods inside of cities or anything like that.
All right. With that, let's jump into the latest update in the Tao Fred land, which is the Consumer Vehicle Regulator Checklist. Why don't I know the name of this by now? I should. It's a new year. I should know it. Fred?
Well, it's the AV checklist for regulators and people who have an interest in diving a little deeper than just merely recklessly quoting what they see in a newspaper about AVs. So we've gone through 28. 29 has a computer-driven vehicle. Notice we don't say AV here, but has a computer-driven vehicle been certified to comply with all applicable federal motor vehicle safety standard requirements, or does it have a valid exemption? So we've got questions about that, Michael, especially with Zoox and its really questionable exemption for their current trials.
Yeah, we're not even sure if that's, they've gotten a demonstration exemption. I would argue that it wasn't appropriate based on the language of the statute, but that's another issue. But now they're still awaiting confirmation. They've said they're going to start charging for rides this month. But at this point, they still haven't received an exemption that would allow them to operate commercially in that fashion. So we're not sure yet.
Well, the next two are kind of operate in tandem, but I got separate numbers on them. Number 30 is, has the applicant shown that the computer-driven vehicle collects and saves enough operational data to resolve root cause of incidents and collisions? So what we've seen in the past is that the AV manufacturers and Tesla, whether or not that's an AV, will try to hide as much data as possible so that the question of liability is unresolved or can be pushed over onto the consumer. But in association with that, as number 31, has the applicant shown that operational data recorded before a reportable incident or collision is preserved and accessible to stakeholders for post-incident or crash root cause engineering evaluation and or legal use by those with direct interest? And that arises from the practice that's very common now for companies to withhold their data, to obscure it as much as possible, and make it very, very difficult for somebody who's injured by these computer-driven vehicles, whether they're inside of the car or outside of the car, to actually get to the engineering cause of this crash or injury. Right? We've seen that.
Yeah. And there's a big question here, I think, lying over this one when it comes to artificial intelligence. Is it even possible to collect enough operational data to resolve root cause of a crash that could have been caused by, bad training of a machine learning module or something like that, right?
It gets out like why it made a mistake.
Well, there are techniques that can do that, Monte Carlo analysis in particular, but it's very expensive, takes a lot of thought and time, and it's not particularly straightforward.
So, Fred, when coming up with this list, did you just sit there and go, let me look at all the shitty things that Tesla's done over the years and write down a list of, say, can the list just be shorter and be like, don't be Tesla?
Yeah, that was inspirational, but it goes beyond just Tesla.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't forget our friend Kyle.
Oh, yeah, there are definitely some Kyle and some, Waymo Follies material in here, as well as some other things that other companies have brought to the table.
All right, continue.
Has the applicant shown that the subject computer-driven vehicles, conventional mechanical equipment, electrical and electromechanical components, and passive hardware are inspectable by officials during required periodic and on-demand safety inspections? So remember, when we go to computer-driven vehicles, we are taking a lot of the safety-critical functionality that's implicit in a human driver, and we're sticking it in a machine. And we're assuming that safety-critical functionality is always available, right? They all say they don't drink, they don't sleep, they don't have sexual notions, they don't, right? You heard all that stuff. All right, so prove it. Show the regulators that you got a way of understanding how close you are to the margins and that you are far enough away from the safety margins so that it's reasonable to operate the vehicle.
All right, can we save the final two for next week?
Well, we can, except there's 4 more.
Oh, really? Wait.
Yeah, see, Anthony needs to update the website and add
I have.
ones, right?
Wait, did you give me new ones? Fred and I had a whole back and forth on this of wrong files and stuff. What's your total number? I have.
My total number is 36.
36.
Okay.
Like the documents that I've sent you, Anthony.
Yeah. So
we're okay.
We'll be back with the final 4 next week. Anthony
Perfect.
may or may not be here with us.
Oh, well, here's my final.
But thanks, folks. Any feedback on these is appreciated. Love to hear from you.
All right, let's do some Lamborghini talk. Recall talk. And the first one is Lamborghini. That's right. The 2019 to 2024 Lamborghini Urus. And the situation here is you may not be as good looking as the salesperson who sold it to you said you are. Is that the issue? Huh. No, it's a rear view camera image that does not display. Oh, in certain situations, a software issue may prevent the rear view camera image from displaying. And if you spent $500,000 on this car, I'm guessing, I don't know how much they cost, you'd want that to work, right?
Yeah.
It's a rear view camera. This is how we start off a new year, Michael. Come on.
Well, actually, this was filed on December 21st, 2025. So we may be starting out the new year with it, but it is a recall from last year. Although owners, it doesn't look like they have a final date for the repair facility. They must still be working on it because they're sending out an interim owner notification to their owners sometime in mid-February.
All right. Next up, Porsche, 173,538 vehicles, the 2020 to 2025 Taycan, 2025 Panamera E Hybrid, and the 2024-2025 Panamera. There's a bunch more. There's Cayennes and 911s, and there's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of Porsches.
Come on. In certain rare instances, a software issue may prevent the rear camera image from displaying. Why? This is 2 in a row. I'm a sensitive man. Yeah.
And the reason I put these in this week was, well, mainly because at the end of the year, we don't see a lot of recalls reported to NHTSA, and NHTSA may not be processing them fastly. So there weren't a lot to choose from this week. However, these two did bump the number of rear view camera recalls for the year up to 60, which is a record. No, Ford's not the only one breaking recall records this year. Rear view cameras, and 60, I think the last highest year we might have ventured into the 40s. I haven't done the tabulations on that, but this is a problem that has been growing every year, and enough to the point we even did a special episode about it a few months back. And it's something that the industry really needs to get a handle on now that these recalls make up, a significant percentage of overall recalls. Around, 7% or so of all the recalls this year involve rear view cameras. So
I don't think it's going to get any better because the cars are getting older.
Yeah, these cars are getting older, but the recalls have already applied to these older models. I guess what we hope in the future is that they're going to incorporate their lessons learned from this, at this point, hundreds of recalls that have happened over the past few years on rear view cameras into the newer vehicles that will have fewer problems. That might sound overly aspirational to you, Fred.
Well, I admire the durability of your optimism, Michael.
Yeah, that's impressive. Wow. Gaslighting us again. So 60 rear view recalls. If my math's correct, that's almost one a week.
That's more than one a week.
So last recall, Volkswagen, 27,768 vehicles, the 2025 Audi SQ6 e-tron, the SQ6 Sportback, the A6, the A5, a whole bunch of Audis, the S5, and the certain seatbelt assemblies may not comply with FMVSS 208 and 209, as the automatic locking regulator may fail to prevent the seatbelt webbing from being extended more than the allowable length after locking when a seatbelt is used to secure a child restraint seat. This sounds dangerous. It sounds very specific, too. So I plug in my seatbelt with a child. I don't understand it.
Essentially, you're going to have a tight, if you're using a seatbelt, most modern cars and probably all of these vehicles were manufactured using the latch system, which you've probably seen in your car. So there should be somewhere around your back seat, depending on whether you've got a hatchback or a normal sedan, you'll see kind of a hook that you can attach you can basically take the car seat and plug it into your vehicle, versus the old school way of doing all this was to actually use your seatbelt and thread it through the base of the car seat to keep it fixed. And essentially there is a locking pin that's malfunctioning that prevents a strong connection between the seatbelt and the car seat that prevents this, that holds the seat in place in a crash in these vehicles. And so Audi's going to have to go back, and it looks like, replace it with a component with a spring cassette that's not damaged, meets the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, and can keep the car seats secured.
And with that, that's the end of our show. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. We'll be back next week for more exciting auto safety news.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.